The enemy thought they were facing monsters, until the gunfire spoke back. The jungles of Galar Prime twisted like a nightmare under the weight of 2 suns and 1,000 years of silence. When the invasion came, it wasn't with banners or diplomacy. The enemy, Valkyrie Warbrood, descended in waves, cloaked in armor spun from black iron and arrogance. They had conquered 12 systems in 3 cycles, burned 100 worlds, and now they came for this one. Their scouts returned bloodied and breathless. They don't speak, one hissed, collapsing to its knees. They howl. The Valkyrie commander dismissed it as nonsense, superstition, fear, monsters, he called them. No language, no culture, just brutes in shadows. Eliminate them. But monsters don't set traps that slice through armored personnel carriers like they were made of paper. Monsters don't mark trees with coded patterns only visible in infrared. And monsters sure as hell don't answer a suppression barrage with a precision counter-snipe that tears through command ranks like a scalpel through soft meat. By the 5th day, their dropships were nothing but molten wreckage, cratered and wired with crude but devastating anti-personnel mines. The Valkyrie were no longer advancing, they were surviving. Then came the night the jungle spoke. A Valkyrie platoon commander, Skur Talrek, had taken refuge in a collapsed ridge with 20 soldiers. The night was unnaturally quiet, no insects, no animals, not even the wind dared to move through the thick branches. His second-in-command, Threk, was the first to hear it. A whisper. Target acquired. A click. Then fire. Not from plasma cannons or energy blades, but ballistic rifles, gunpowder, casings, metal slugs screaming through the air, ancient weapons, primitive by Valkyrie standards, but wielded with terrifying precision and rhythm, and from multiple angles. The Valkyrie screamed as their exosuits crumpled under rounds designed for tank armor. And then, in the chaos, a voice cut through the jungle's darkness. Calm, steady. Enemy flanking, rotate left, fire in 3, 2, 1. Bang, bang, bang. It was a human voice. They understood the enemy now. These weren't monsters. These were soldiers. And that made it so much worse. Because monsters you fight with courage. But soldiers? Soldiers win wars. By the 10th day, the Valkyrie columns were filled with panic. They coordinate through the trees. They vanish into the mud. They speak death. In orbit, the Valkyrie flagship received its final transmission, the sound of static, a scream, and one final phrase in a voice calm as ice. You came to fight beasts. You stayed to die by trained hands. Welcome to humanity's forgotten regiment. Then silence. The commander stood frozen in his throne of bone and steel, watching as the planet below flickered with red. This was no occupation. It was a graveyard. And the monsters? They weren't real. But the soldiers? They were. And now the galaxy knew, when humanity went silent, it wasn't because they were afraid. It was because they were aiming. Part 2, The Jungle Remembers. Valkyrie High Command did not take failure lightly. In retaliation, they dispatched a dreadnought and 2 legions of reinforcements, 100,000 warriors, genetically enhanced and hive-linked through neural implants. Orbit-to-surface bombardments were authorized. This time, there would be no mistakes. The dreadnought's commander, Ulrex Thal, issued his proclamation. Purge the jungle. Salt the earth, leave nothing breathing. They never expected the jungle to answer back. Within the hour of landing, contact with 6 outposts was lost. Not destroyed, just gone. No gunfire, no screams, no explosions, just silence. They sent drones to investigate. The feeds returned glitched, shaky, and finally blacked out entirely. Until one came back online. The camera showed a clearing littered with Valkyrie corpses, arranged in a spiral, arms spread wide, rifles broken in half, a symbol carved into the dirt at the center, a skull with one eye still burning. Then came the message. A human stood before the camera, dirty, bleeding, camouflage smeared across his face. He wore no insignia, no medals, just an old ballistic vest and a rifle that looked too worn to still work. But in his eyes was the cold, surgical calm of a man who'd seen more wars than peace. He leaned into the camera and whispered, "You brought a legion to hunt ghosts. Let me help you count the dead." Then the feed cut again. Panic began to spread among the Valkyrie. Ulrich Thal demanded answers. Where were the enemy bases, the cities, the command centers? But there were none. Galar Prime had once been a human colony. Until something came that the rest of the galaxy refused to acknowledge, a war too brutal, too long, too human to record in clean history. So they were erased. All except the ones who stayed behind. The ones who refused evacuation. The ones who chose silence. They became the Forgotten Regiment. And now, they were reminding the galaxy of what humanity truly was when pushed into the dark. Ulrich launched a total sweep. Forests were burned. Drones dropped napalm. Entire regions turned to ash. Still, the bodies of Valkyrie disappeared. And the whispers began again. Radio transmissions intercepted late at night. Contact North Ridge. Drop M. Claymores set. Tell Thorn to hold position. We bleed. We don't break. Valkyrie soldiers stopped sleeping. Some turned their weapons on shadows. Others tried to desert, only to vanish between trees that never let them out. By the time the dreadnought's orbit began to falter, its fuel sabotaged, its navigation corrupted, Ulrich knew. They were not facing monsters. They were not facing a civilization. They were facing survivors who had forgotten how to lose. And as the last Valkyrie escape pod fell toward the jungle, fire trailing behind it, a single phrase echoed across every Valkyrie channel. This is Sergeant Avery Grant, 2nd Earthborn Recon. We're still here. You wanted a war. Now you're in ours. And then the jungle lit up again, not with fire, but with gunfire that spoke back. Next. Part 3, The Regiment Never Left. The Valkyrie Empire held emergency council 3 days after losing the Galar Dreadnought. Entire fleets had gone silent. Dozens of officers were unresponsive. There was no word from the surface of Galar Prime, only corrupted transmissions, looping fragments of screams, and gunfire that didn't match any known combat protocols. High Executor Drexel said what no one dared to admit aloud. They are not monsters. They are humans trained to become monsters. The council voted to quarantine the system. The war, if it could still be called that, was declared a containment priority. But the fear had already spread. Because something strange began happening on other worlds. Outposts once held firmly under Valkyrie rule started to lose contact. It began in the outer colonies, remote, forgotten places with aging infrastructure. A guard tower would go quiet. A convoy would vanish. Surveillance drones would go offline one by one. And every time, the signs were the same. No plasma burns. No orbital strikes. No alien interference. Just human footprints. And spent shell casings. Some were stamped with Earth dates centuries old. The Forgotten Regiment hadn't stayed on Galar Prime. They'd spread. On the mining world of Trelos 9, a Valkyrie commander named Kelvek began noticing subtle changes. Crates moved slightly from where they'd been stored. Rations went missing. Precisely measured, never all. Just enough to delay discovery. Patrol paths were altered. Cameras glitched in repeating patterns. His instincts screamed at him. He ordered his troops to double shifts. He even tried to burn the outer jungle. That night, as the firelight flickered across the compound, the loudspeakers clicked on, hijacked. A voice, low and exhausted, filled the air. You brought this on yourselves. Gunfire erupted from the trees. Explosives detonated from inside Valkyrie bunkers. Uniforms were found folded neatly in bloodless barracks. And in the command post, etched into the metal floor with a combat knife, were 5 words. The regiment never left you. Back on Earth, the Terran Union listened carefully. The Forgotten Regiment had been a classified experiment, a last-ditch survival unit sent to hold Galar Prime when all others withdrew. Cut off, abandoned, presumed dead. They weren't. They'd adapted, gone feral, built their own war from the bones of failed empires. Now, they didn't take orders. They didn't wave flags. They didn't come back. They made the war follow them. And across the stars, whispered among terrified soldiers of every species, a new phrase entered the lexicon. If you hear the gunfire talking back, it's already too late. Because the monsters the galaxy feared weren't beasts. They were human. And they had finally remembered how to speak. With fire. With steel. With war. Want the next part? The regiment begins targeting high command. Part 4, they started hunting commanders. The Valkyrie called it the decapitation season. In a span of 6 weeks, 17 high-ranking Valkyrie commanders were found dead, not during battles, not at the front. In their bunkers. In their personal quarters. On fortified worlds. One was killed in orbit, his ship's oxygen vented during a routine systems check. No alarms, no breach detected, only a single shell casing left on the command deck, sitting perfectly upright. Another died in his sleep with a single knife wound through his primary heart, delivered with surgical precision. The door had never opened, the guards never heard a sound. The message was clear. Nowhere was safe. These weren't random assassinations. This was strategy. And every time, the only trace left behind was the same, a mark scorched into walls, etched into armor, or carved into flesh. Skull and crossbones, the forgotten regiment's sigil, a burning skull. A Valkyrie intelligence report, later leaked by defectors, listed a dozen suspected human names responsible for the hits, but there was no data on them, no birth records, no unit affiliation. Just code names whispered in fear across the comms. Whisper 3, the sniper that fired from miles away, through walls, through armor, through time if you listened to the terrified survivors. Breaker, the one who walked straight into an enemy line and didn't stop until it was quiet. Mother Ghost, who left care packages of explosives in field hospitals and lullabies on the comms before they blew. And the worst of them, Sergeant Avery Grant, the voice that started it all. The galaxy tried to respond. Mercenary guilds were hired, AI hunter-killer swarms were deployed, bounties larger than fleet budgets were issued. Nothing worked. Because you can't buy loyalty strong enough to chase something that doesn't fear death. You can't predict ghosts. And you can't fight soldiers who stopped fighting for medals 100 years ago. They weren't killing for revenge. They were erasing systems for something older than that. Purpose. In a hidden war council buried deep beneath the ocean crust of Droxian 4, Valkyrie generals debated abandoning entire sectors. I won't lose my command to invisible savages, roared War Master Helvin. A nearby monitor blinked to life. It wasn't connected. A single feed activated, a dimly lit room, empty, except for a wall lined with faces. Valkyrie faces, all commanders, all dead, their names scratched out in red. Then a voice came through the speakers. You took our home. You took our brothers. So now, we take your name. And when none of you are left, when your empires are dust, when your stars burn out, then we'll stop. Then silence. Helvin didn't sleep that night. And by dawn, he was dead. His bodyguard never saw who pulled the trigger. All they found was one shell. Still warm. And carved into the casing. The regiment remembers. Shall we continue? The galaxy begins to fear Earth's silence once more. Part 5, the silence before Earth spoke again. The galaxy once thought Earth was finished. The Terran Union had withdrawn. Their colonies were scattered. Their fleets had gone dark after the Fourth Rift War. And their diplomats? Gone from the council halls. Their embassies abandoned to dust and memory. Earth had fallen silent. But silence is not surrender. Silence is the sound before thunder. And the thunder was coming back, carried not on ships or declarations, but through the whispers of 1,000 terrified soldiers who had faced the forgotten regiment and lived. Barely. In the Krell Confederacy, an entire moon went dark, not bombed, not glassed. Just empty. The last message broadcast from its surface came from a Krell tactician, screaming into the void. They're not taking territory, they're taking faces. Every time I blink, one of us is gone. No alarms, no breaches, just vanished. And they keep leaving our own voices on the recorders, mocking us. We taught the galaxy to fear monsters. But we forgot the one species that never needed claws to kill. We forgot Earth. Then static. No one went to investigate. Across the stars, the phrase human silence became a military warning. If humans weren't speaking, if Earth wasn't transmitting, if a colony wasn't asking for trade or aid or help, it meant only one thing. They were watching. And worse. They were remembering. The Terran Union, long dormant, finally stirred. On an encrypted wideband channel heard across 50 sectors, a message played once every 12 hours. This is Earth Command. We acknowledge the loss of Galar Prime. The Forgotten Regiment has exceeded containment parameters. We did not unleash them. But we will stand with them. If you see the skull, walk away. If you hear them speak, run. If you fire first, God help you. The galaxy lost its collective breath. This wasn't war anymore. This was history correcting itself, with blood. Meanwhile, on a frozen world beyond the edge of any known star chart, the Forgotten Regiment had built something terrifying. A black tower made of war wreckage and bones. No signals, no power, but the gravity around it bent oddly. At its center, deep underground, was a table. Around it sat only a dozen soldiers. Human, scarred, ancient. And in front of them, a holographic star map. Lighting up. One system at a time. They weren't chasing glory. They weren't reclaiming Earth's empire. They were reminding the galaxy what happens when you mistake silence for peace. Avery Grant lit a cigarette with shaking hands and muttered to no one. They thought monsters were the worst we could be. We showed them soldiers. Now they'll learn what happens when Earth decides to speak again. Next, Earth officially returns, and the galaxy panics. Part 6. When Earth spoke, the stars trembled. It began with a ripple, a single word. Spoken not through war, but through diplomacy. Broadcast from a derelict human station once thought abandoned, now pulsing with renewed life. We're listening. The message repeated every hour on every frequency. It wasn't a threat. It was an invitation. And across the galaxy, on council floors, in war rooms, aboard fleets that had once counted humanity extinct, there was only panic. Because when Earth didn't speak, death came from the trees. But when Earth did, it meant they were ready to finish what the regiment started. The Galactic Assembly, a forum of hundreds of species, called an emergency summit. Earth was to be contacted, peace offered, deals made. But the Terran Union didn't send a delegate. They didn't send a ship. They sent a file. Inside it, a list of names. Every name on the list belonged to someone who had authorized, ordered, or profited from the Valkyrie-led invasion of Galar Prime. And beside each name was one word: hunted. Then the message ended with 5 chilling lines. We are not invading. We are not negotiating. The regiment has marked the guilty. Earth will not stop them. Earth remembers. Fleet Admiral Vorshek of the Thark Dominion, responsible for arming Valkyrie drop forces, fled to the fortified orbital city of New Carrick. It didn't matter. He was found in his private chamber, throat slit, eyes wide in horror, the walls smeared with words in Terran standard. We found you. His guards, untouched. His alarms, silent. And the security footage? Deleted, except for one still image left looping on the monitor, a human soldier in tattered fatigues, standing over Vorshek's body, saluting. On the diplomatic channels, panic turned to pleading. Species that once mocked Earth now begged it to recall the Forgotten Regiment. Even the Valkyrie, their war fleets in ruins and their command structure shattered, sent an envoy. He arrived on a Terran listening post, hands shaking, voice trembling. Please, he said, we surrender, we'll stand trial, we'll offer reparations, just call off your ghosts. The human officer didn't even look up from his datapad. They don't take orders from us anymore, he said, they take them from the graves we left behind. Then Earth dropped the second signal. This one wasn't a voice. It was a location, soul system, open, unrestricted. For the first time in over a century, Earth invited the galaxy home. Thousands came, skeptical, curious, afraid. What they found was not the war-torn husk they'd expected. Earth had rebuilt, quietly, efficiently, relentlessly. No monuments, no fanfare. Just factories. Training grounds. Launch pads. Not for conquest. For containment. The humans welcomed visitors politely. But the warning was clear in their eyes. We will never be caught off guard again. In orbit, a single ship drifted past the Terran Fleet Command Station, a black vessel, silent and old, barely held together by plating and scars. A symbol was painted on the hull, skull and crossbones, the burning skull of the Forgotten Regiment. Inside, no crew, just names carved into every surface. Names of the dead, names of the lost, names of those still hunting. A final transmission pulsed out from the ship, unencrypted, untranslated, but every species understood it. It wasn't a message. It was a declaration. The galaxy forgot who we were. So we reminded them. You wanted to meet monsters. But you met the regiment. And behind them, Earth. Next, the regiment vanishes again, but this time, their legend becomes a doctrine. Want to continue? Part 7. The Doctrine of the Forgotten Regiment. The galaxy thought it was over. The Valkyrie Empire was broken. The old warlords had vanished. Those who survived fled to exile, changed their names, buried their weapons. Fleets were dismantled. Sanctions were signed. Earth sat quiet again. The Forgotten Regiment? Gone. No signals, no sightings, no whispers in the trees. But something worse took their place. Doctrine. They called it the Ghost Protocol. It began in backwater training camps, among mercenaries and militias terrified of being caught unprepared. Then it crept into planetary defense forces, naval academies. Even species once hostile to humans began copying it, quietly, nervously. It wasn't a strategy. It was a belief system. What the Forgotten Regiment had done, how they fought, how they vanished, became a template. Its core tenets were passed down like sacred scripture. 1. Silence is camouflage. Speak only when it's too late for the enemy to matter. 2. Kill the command, not the soldier. Wars end when leaders bleed. 3. Use what's broken. Build from ruin. Adapt. Survive. Return. 4. Fear is a weapon. If your enemy believes you are everywhere, you don't have to be. 5. Never seek glory. Seek justice. And if that fails, seek vengeance. It spread. Not because of propaganda. But because across 100 worlds, there were still shadows moving in the trees. On the gas world of Yeltran, children played a game called Regiment Hunt. One child would hide, the others would hunt. The rule was simple. If the hidden child made it to the control tower and whispered a phrase before being caught, they won. The phrase? You thought I was gone. No one knew who taught them that. No one dared to ask. New military cadets across the Orion Spur were taught regiment evasion scenarios, what to do if they ever saw the skull. The correct answer? Run. If you fought, you wouldn't live long enough to regret it. Because somewhere, out there, the Forgotten Regiment still walked. Years passed. Galactic peace seemed to hold. But in the ruins of an old Valkyrie listening post, long thought collapsed by time, a drone unearthed a sealed vault. Inside, a single helmet, scorched and cracked. Human-made. Carved across the visor. We never stopped. You just stopped looking. The drone uploaded the discovery. Within hours, 3 systems went dark. No bodies were found. Only messages left behind. You built a doctrine from our war. But we never followed rules. We followed ghosts. And ghosts don't forget. Back on Earth, deep beneath Terran military archives, an old general stood in silence before a black wall covered in names, no medals, no ranks, just a single word etched above them. Regiment. A junior officer stepped up beside him. Sir, the galaxy thinks they're gone. The general didn't turn. That's the point. So, what now? He paused. Then whispered. We wait. Not for the regiment. But for the next ones. Because they didn't just leave a mark. They left a map. And in training camps across Earth and beyond, quiet recruits studied it, young, determined, burning with something the galaxy would one day fear again. Not monsters. Not soldiers. Something worse. Humanity. Remembering. Next, years later, someone tries to copy the regiment and finds out the hard way why the original never needed permission. Want to continue? Part 8, The Imitators and the Judgment. Decades passed. The galaxy healed, or pretended to. New alliances formed, trade flowed, old enemies smiled behind polished glass. Histories were rewritten in real time. Children taught that the war had ended with diplomacy, not with the regiment. But in the shadows of that peace, others began to rise. Mercenary warlords. Corporate strike groups. Governments built on ambition and arrogance. And among them, one dared to speak the forbidden phrase aloud. We can be the next regiment. They called themselves the Revenants. Clad in scavenged Terran armor. Taught in half-truths and brutality. Using fear the way the regiment used silence. They mimicked the marks. Used the same skull symbol. Claimed the same doctrine. But there was one thing they didn't understand. The Forgotten Regiment didn't fight for fear. They fought for memory. They fought for each other. They fought because no one else would. The Revenants fought for profit. And the galaxy, still haunted by whispers of the original regiment, believed them. Until one day, the Revenants found a planet that wasn't on any chart. A jungle world, silent and black. An unmarked world with no beacon. Just bones. They landed anyway. Arrogant, mocking. Spraying their sigils on ancient trees. Claiming territory. Until the sky went quiet. And one by one, their comms dropped. The last Revenant transmission was picked up by 5 listening stations across 3 sectors. Audio only. Frantic. Heavy breathing. Gunfire in the background. Screaming. We're not ready. They're not gone. We didn't, this was supposed to be symbolic. We thought we could be them. A long pause. Then a new voice, calm and older than any record had archived, spoke with deliberate weight. You wore the mask. But you never earned the scars. You used our name. Now carry our burden. Judgment is here. A single gunshot. Then silence. In the aftermath, the Revenants vanished. No bodies recovered. No wreckage. Nothing. Just one artifact, found drifting in orbit. A Revenant helmet, shattered down the middle, with something scratched into its surface in old Earth standard. We don't come back to be worshipped. We come back to end liars. The message was heard. Across the galaxy, imitators burned their colors. False regiments disbanded overnight. Governments rewrote history again, this time in hushed tones. And across the stars, no one claimed the skull. No one dared. Because the Forgotten Regiment hadn't been a legend. They were a warning. And the warning stood. Use our name. And we will remind you why it is feared. Next, a new threat arises, not from the past, but from beyond the known stars, and the galaxy realizes, only the regiment knows how to fight what doesn't fear anything. Want to continue? Part 9, The Threat Beyond Stars. It came from beyond the veil. Not a fleet. Not a species. Not something that could be reasoned with. The galaxy had no name for it, just a designation. Redacted Sigma 13. A frequency, a shape, a hunger. Ships vanished without distress calls. Planets went silent overnight. Moons cracked open like eggs. Their cores harvested. Their atmospheres gone. There were no demands, no faces, no messages. Just patterns. And those patterns began moving inward. From the rim toward the heart of the known galaxy. At first, the core powers didn't panic. They deployed scout fleets, deployed dreadnoughts, sent out AI-controlled exterminator drones. None returned. One drone made it halfway back. Its final broadcast was corrupted, except for one frame of footage. A massive field of orbiting corpses, alien, human, machine, twisting through black starlight like decorations. And one shape walking among them. Tall, bipedal. Human? No. Wearing stolen armor. Regiment armor. Warped, glowing, wrong. Panic followed. Not from the civilians, they weren't told. From the military, deep in classified bunkers, watching the approach of something they didn't understand, something they couldn't predict. And that's when they remembered. The only humans who ever fought without needing orders. The only ones who adapted faster than fear. The ones who bled, but never broke. The ones who had once gone silent and come back as fire. So Earth made a call. One signal. Encrypted, primitive. Old tech, analog bursts. The kind only one group still listened to. It was answered from a jungle moon that didn't exist on any chart. A clearing filled with gear decades out of date. Men and women with empty eyes, scarred hands, and names worn away by time. And at the center of them, Sergeant Avery Grant. Older, slower. But when the signal ended, he stood. Said nothing. Just lit a flare and tossed it into the brush. Around him, the jungle came alive. Silhouettes rising from under the roots, from the trees, from under their own graves. The forgotten regiment had heard the call. And they were coming home. Earth didn't send fleets. It didn't launch missiles. It just spoke one phrase to the rest of the galaxy. Stand down. This fight belongs to the forgotten. In a derelict station on the edge of the Veil, a survivor was found, clinging to life, eyes wide with madness. When questioned about what destroyed his fleet, he whispered only one thing. It wasn't the thing we feared that killed us. It was who showed up to stop it. It was the regiment. But they weren't fighting for revenge this time. They were fighting for us. He looked up, tears streaming. And God help whatever stands in their way. Next, the forgotten regiment wages war against the unknowable, and the galaxy watches as humanity becomes something even monsters fear. Want to continue? Part 10. What fights monsters? They breached the veil at dawn. No fanfare, no declaration, just 12 drop pods screaming through vacuum, old Terran alloy. No stealth coatings, no shields. Inside each, a handful of soldiers who hadn't seen home in decades. Some didn't remember what home even meant anymore. They didn't need to. They remembered why they fought. And as the regiment hit the surface of the dead world on the other side of the veil, the galaxy held its breath. No one else dared follow. Not fleets. Not mercenaries. Not heroes. Only watchers. Only witnesses. Because what lay beyond Sigma-13 wasn't just hostile. It was wrong. The planet had no name, no breathable air, no sky, just a churning violet haze that whispered in languages no brain was meant to understand. The regiment walked through it anyway. The first wave of redacted Sigma-13 met them in silence, twisted constructs of stolen flesh and folded metal, moving without gravity, without heat, without soul. But the regiment didn't panic. They marked targets, set charges, called range. And then, the gunfire spoke. Old rifles, ancient rounds. Not fancy, not advanced. Just precise. The first wave fell. The second adapted. Grew tendrils, learned heat maps, began flanking. The regiment changed again. They turned the environment against the enemy, using gravity fractures to slingshot ammo, funneling enemies into quantum instability zones, setting traps made from war scrap and instinct. Because that's what humans do. They survive the impossible. They study what scares them. And then they teach it fear. Back in the core worlds, feeds from high-orbit recon drones watched with growing dread. Not because the enemy was winning. But because the regiment was. And they were changing. The soldiers that returned to exfil points weren't like before. Still human, but sharper, meaner, calmer. As if staring into the endless abyss of redacted had not broken them. It had reminded them who they truly were. One drone captured a soldier, face smeared in alien ash, walking calmly back toward the dropship. When asked by remote AI what they encountered, the soldier paused, then said, "We didn't fight monsters. We fought what monsters fear. And now it knows our name. It'll run, but we'll follow." Galactic military theorists went into crisis. Councils demanded answers. No one understood how a regiment of outdated, unofficial, forgotten soldiers was winning a war that fleets couldn't even approach. They studied every frame of footage, every bullet fired, every formation used. But there was one thing they couldn't replicate. The regiment didn't just fight to survive. They fought to protect a galaxy that abandoned them. No flags. No praise. No orders. Just a promise kept to the dead. Earth broadcast a final message, a rare one, heard across the stars, untranslated, unfiltered. The regiment was never about glory. It was about doing what no one else would. About standing the line long after the others fell. And now that something worse than war has come for us, they'll go first. They'll go alone. Because that's what they've always done. They don't fight for Earth anymore. They fight for everyone. The galaxy listened in silence. Because finally, they understood. You don't send diplomats to reason with nightmares. You don't send fleets to chase ghosts. You send the forgotten regiment. And then you pray you never have to follow. Next, the enemy changes tactics, beginning to mimic the regiment, and a final reckoning is set in motion. Shall we continue? Part 11, The Imitation War. Redacted Sigma-13 didn't die. It adapted. That's what made it worse than any species the galaxy had ever known. It didn't just destroy. It learned.